this looks good.
Oh my god, this is delicious.
I definitely want to taste that.
Now we're going to move into our plate of the day. Afro-Latinidad on stage. So I have to say, like, for me, being in theater, it took way too long in my theatrical career for me to recognize that there were other Dominicans in theater. I thought that with outside of the people who I had entered MCC theater with, who there happened to be some Dominicans in there, outside of them, that we were very scarce and that I would have to do some really big digging to find them. And for a while questioned, how many Dominican playwrights are there? If I wanted to look at history, theater history, how far back could I actually go to try to surface Dominican theater if I wanted to? And I remember feeling like it needed to then be my job. Everything that I was going to do should have my Dominican identity in mind, because I should, because I am, and no one else has, right? And in that narrative, and really that came from lack of exposure, lack of, education and stuff around that. But I just, I remember entering theater and feeling like I was already taking on something that meant that I needed to be transformative in changing something, which already made it different than what I knew everybody else was going to do in the space. Which, it was good and also made it really intimidating for me at the same time. And so now that we are living in a time where we're having discussions around theater, the stories we're telling, who is telling these stories, how are we casting and keeping inclusivity in mind? It's been really interesting to reflect on, I guess for so long, even though I understood that there was a way in which I still subscribed to the system of theater and what it was telling me I needed to do. And I always thought of it as I have to follow their way first. And then when I get there, then I can fuck shit up. But now I feel like with the pandemic and Broadway being closed and just the Black Lives Matter movement altogether, there's room for theater and Black voices, and specifically even nuanced Black voices, and not just capturing the African-American story, but diving deeper into the diaspora, that maybe that changes a little bit. So I've been thinking about this a lot. And since you, Guadalis, are a Black theater artist, I, wanted to dive deeper into this conversation with you. And my first question that comes up is even just what was your first interaction with Black theater, and even specifically Afro-Latinx theater?
I'm trying to remember I saw Black theater in Chicago. And Court Theater in Chicago, they're on the South Side. They're at University of Chicago. But they do a lot of August Wilson revivals. So that was really my first interaction with Black theater. In the ways of which, in how I watch theater now. The theater company that I also work with a lot, I work with two companies in Chicago a lot, Aguijón Theater, which is a Spanish theater company, and Urban Theater Company. And Urban Theater, they produced one of Susan Laurie Park's plays, Fucking A. Pretty sure. I think it was Fucking A, yeah. So those were really my first experiences with Black theater. With Afro-Latinx theater, I would honestly have to say it would just be me.
Yourself.
Myself.
That's certainly my answer,
Yeah. I mean, Chicago, it's honest. If I'm going to be honest, if I'm going to keep it 100, it's one of the reasons why I moved to New York,
So I'm going to assume that none of y'all saw Afro-Latinx. Plátanos and Collard Greens.
I always heard of it, but I never watched.
I think for me, that was my first interaction, because I was part of this after school program for Latinos, trying to get Latinos into high school. And they but it was because I was a part of a program that was an effort to expose students to that. Plátanos and Collard Greens.
I didn't even know that was a play.
Yeah, they've been doing it, or they were doing it at like BMCC and stuff like that downtown in the city, but also
Vagina
like
Monologues. You see how Vagina Monologues took life and legs and like was everywhere? That was a show that sort of had legs that way where people would do it. But because it was one of the few pieces to see
yeah.
the point that was representative in that way.
Yeah, that when I'm thinking of like my first interaction with Latinx theater, period, or Black theater, like that's the first thing that comes to mind. Aside from then, Lin Manuel, you know, like in the Heights, and there are like I feel like whenever I like there were like maybe one or two more that I've seen in New York, but all have been on smaller scale, like small scale, small theater, low budget, you know. Um, so yeah, I mean, needless to say that like people are not putting money or were not putting money into uh, that part of the community when we were growing up.
Well, I mean, it's also the thing of like when you say Afro Latinx theater, is it the playwright that you mean, or is it the story, or because I mean, I saw In the Heights in Chicago, and I wouldn't necessarily call that an Afro.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's real. Uh, um, yeah.
And that's what I mean though, is kind of like and to another question that I'm sort of like that I wanted to ask a little later around what is enough, like what do we pass as actual, like what are we marking as, you know, Afro Latinx theater or Black theater, and what does that mean for me? I feel like my first interaction with Black theater was when at LaGuardia High School we did well, I wasn't in it, but Ragtime.
Ragtime.
Ragtime had happened, and so the cast was like there was a lot of Black kids, and we had a lot of talented kids in our school. So for me, like experiencing that play was such a big, like it was both a moment of like the testimony of the talent that we had amongst the Black artists in our school, but then being like, wow, there are plays that have this many Black people on at once. Like it was just like, that was actually the surprise to me, that there were so many Black people on that stage at once. And so that these numbers, it almost felt like church in certain moments, you know, and it felt like a ceremony, like watching the play felt like a ceremony. And then I think that was the beginning of me realizing like, fuck, we are excellent at this thing that I've only been exposed to as a white thing. Like if you were to ask me outside of like, I did Raisin in the Sun as my monologue because Raisin in the Sun was maybe like the only Black play I knew with the scope of theater exposure I had at that point before entering LaGuardia. Like, you know what I mean? And so I was like, if it wasn't like that or Fences, then I really had no knowledge of it. So anyway, I'm rambling, but I say that to say, like, I think that even in the moment that I did have, even though it was a school production of something, what I recognized in the talent of the Black artists was that there was something special about how we occupied the space that the lack of Black theater and Black theater exposure had stolen from me. Like it stole it from my consciousness. So that's where that question really comes from for me. But then, like, you know, the reality is that we know that Black artists, Black theater artists have a different struggle. And some of those struggles are typical struggles that any up and coming theater artists have. But Guadalis, I'd like to hear from you and your experience, because like with working with artists like myself, you really are in the weeds of it, talking about advocacy versus activists. The way you move in the theater world almost feels like activism a little bit, in the sense that you know, you take emerging artists and you put people in places and opportunities. But I wonder, in your doing some of that work, what are some of the challenges that you see that are coming up for these artists that you're sort of like taking under your wing or helping elevate in some way?
That's a deep question, sis. I mean, honestly, like, and I'll say this because I was thinking about this the other day. It's a thing of, you know, theater will pick playwrights and nurture them.
Mm-hmm.
And mentorship is also another thing, and the ways in which mentorship is so instrumental to an artist's career. Like you can listen to, you know, really any playwright and they'll tell you, well, my mentor this and that, and I had this mentor. and how Paula Vogel and a lot of these other, like older playwrights that are amazing and badass, but how they're mentors to, younger playwrights. And I think that that's the biggest thing, which is one of the reasons why I'm the co-artistic director of the Latinx Playwright Circle. And we had our intensive mentorship program. And that was, we were really interested in the ways in which we can set up young playwrights with mentors, because that's so important. And so we have Migdalia Cruz, and we have J. Julian Christopher, Carmen Rivera, and Candido Tirado as our 4 mentors. And the other thing really is it's nurturing. It's like you read a play and you see this playwright's voice, and you're like, there is immense potential here. And so you pour into that playwright, whether it's financially, whether it's with opportunities, whether it's, giving them workshops, but you're pouring into this playwright because you believe in them. And I feel like a lot of times we don't have that because, and I'll say this, it's a racial bias. You'll read someone's play and you don't see the potential because you don't connect with it. A lot of times, whether it's their experience is different or whatever, but and also it might, I think if you watched 40-year-old version, Rada Blank really brings up a lot of important points of how we've had to write to be able to get the attention, right? It's poverty porn. It's Black and brown trauma. It's all these things that, yes, those stories are important, but a lot of times they're written for the white gaze. And so and I say that it's a multi-layer question because there's so many layers. So, one of the things that I really focus on is who are the playwrights whose work I'm super excited about, and how can I create avenues of opportunity for these playwrights to be able to be nurtured and to become better, right? Because experience makes you better, practice makes you better, being nurtured makes you better, having a mentor giving you advice, whether it's about business or about art, like these are all things that make you better. And the ways in which theater has been designed pretty much under white supremacy, under a white supremacist lens,
yes,
it doesn't allow that space for Black and brown artists to be able to have that same type of support. There has been some change in the last 5-10 years, but there's also the thing of the token where one Black or brown playwright is picked, and that's the one that everybody is like, that's the voice. And it's like, if you can have 10 white plays about family dysfunction, you can have 10 Latinx plays about family dysfunction,
right?
Or 10 Black plays about family dysfunction, and because sometimes I'm like, so what's the difference between, what is it, Death of the Salesman and one of Chekhov's play, and you know what I'm saying? Like, it's all perspectives on family,
right?
For example, right? That's not all they write, but allowing for us to also be able to have 5 plays on the same topic but told differently,
right?
Like that's where we start really having, equity in theater.
Yeah.
And as a Black Latina, I'm also very interested in making space for other Black Latinx playwrights, because even within the Latinx theater canon, it's so exclusive.
Yeah. No, it's great, and I think that's why I think I admire the way you work so much, because it is a space creation rather than I'm going to stay within this systemic lens that tells me they're only going to pick one of us. So it better be me. Like, it creates this environment. And I think it's taken some time, but for a while, I think some of the separation of these communities finding each other wasn't because we didn't want each other. It's because we were all in different little nooks where someone who was in the more white people. I don't know why I was looking for other language, where we had white people or institutions that were around us where we were the only ones that they saw. And so we had a very individualistic experience about who we are and what that meant to theater, because they didn't have an exposure and they didn't know the numbers behind how many people, were actually existing within this realm. And so finally, because of social media and the evolution of how theater gets created, and because theater is not that big of a world at the end of the day when you really think about it, as we started to emerge, and I think that our generation had an emergence that perhaps didn't actually happen before us, right? Especially when I think about Black artists and Afro-Latinx even specifically, that we came around the same time. So as these people were like, oh, we found a new, and then it was all like, we were all like, there's more of us? Like in a way that was, but we naturally, because we understood and had been like shaken by these institutions and spaces in such a way that we were so traumatized that we were just it was a breath of fresh air. It was the opposite of competition and feeling like, oh, who's that? It was like ooh, we can do something together, my God.
Yes.
People. And I think that that's also what the Latinx Playwright Circle is with for me a bit. I'm not going to put that on that person on you, but like for me, seeing that was just kind of like a fuck yes, because we don't need them.
Mm-hmm.
We just were hidden behind them because they were holding us behind them. We don't need them. So anyway, sorry, I got passionate there.
No, I love that, but it's it's true. It's like, I started doing theater in Chicago, and there aren't a lot of Dominicans in Chicago, so there really wasn't a reference point for me in that sense, right? Like, there's a lot of Latinx theater artists in Chicago, but not a lot like me get the visibility. So I was very much interested in figuring out where they all were. And I actually found out about Marco Antonio Rodriguez, he's not Afro-Latino, but he is Dominican. And I found out about him before moving here. I remember a friend of mine who was from New York and moved to Chicago. He was like, oh, do you know this playwright? And I was like, oh, no. And that was at the time when his play at Repertorio Español, Ashes of Light, had come out. And that was like the idea that there's another Dominican playwright, like, who's actually getting stuff produced and is featured in the New York Times. Like, to me, that was like, yes, like, we are out here doing this work and this is possible. It's just a matter of how do we connect with each other and really create the thing of like, we come in numbers, so you can't deny us,
Mm-hmm.
And moving here, I'm gonna be honest, like, I legit thought my experience was gonna be so much different than it was in Chicago. And it's been really frustrating to have to live in a neighborhood that is predominantly, Dominican, that is predominantly one thing. And theater refuses to acknowledge, like, theater here in New York City refuses to acknowledge Dominicans in a way that to me is actually violent. Because when you think of all these theater artists, artistic directors, whoever, that gentrify the Heights, and then go to theater, who are Dominicans? I don't know who these people are. They're the neighbors that you're fucking kicking out of the neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? It's like violently removing people from their homes and then pretending like they don't exist when it comes to doing theater work. And then when you look at the data of how Latinx folk, I think, are like almost 30% of the population in New York City, Dominicans being the biggest population. And again, it's like, then why isn't that reflected on New York theater stages?
Right.
Where Latinx work is like, I think, like less than 10%.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's this cognitive dissonance of like, you're really not reflecting the reality of the city that you're living in. And so that's also a lot of what drives me as an artist and as an advocate, is this thing of like, you can't keep denying that we exist. I'm also a loudmouth. So it's like, I will fucking yell and will be up in your institutions yelling about how y'all need to like have more, be more representative of the city that you're living in, because otherwise you are living in fallacy. You are existing in fallacy, and I will say that a lot of that does come from watching Black theater artists that I know and I love be hella unapologetic about their work and their existence and their humanity. And I feel that it's so important for us to also live in that, being unapologetic about our humanity and live that truth as artists, right? Because that informs so much of the art that we end up ultimately doing.
Absolutely.
Come on.
Yes. These gems, 100%. So, I feel like I mentioned a bit earlier that like Broadway in a way has been flipped on its head, especially with this pandemic. And I'm curious, what are some ways you think we can start to challenge Broadway to make space for more than just the Lin-Manuels and their Hamiltons?
Broadway is its own beast because Broadway is money. And so I did take like a Broadway producers course. Like that's one of the things that I did.
Come on, Broadway producers.
And the workshop was being taught by, Broadway producers. And when you see the money that goes into Broadway, it's ridiculous. Like the millions of dollars that are needed to put on a show, right? And so, there's very much the thing of how do we create work? That's number one for me. It's like creating the work, right? Who are the composers? Who are the writers? Who are the lyricists, right? And that's just musicals, but even just plays. What are the plays that are, can be put on Broadway, and who are the ones that are supporting it? And I think of someone, for example, like John Leguizamo. I have my comments and feelings about John Leguizamo, but even someone like him who has the visibility that he does, it was a journey for him to get Latinx history for morons, which I prefer to call not the full Latinx history for morons.
Yeah, he forgot about us.
He
forgot about us. And I went to see it, and I will say this, and I always say that it's not as a defense to him. I took my dad to see it, and because I was like, well, the history, and I didn't know the play. I didn't think we were going to be excluded. Actually, I thought the opposite because, we existed already and we were being talked about already by that time. But the history I did learn, I did not know. I really didn't know. And I think the highlight for me was to see my father experiencing that, and I saw the validation in his face. Like I saw the like in a way that was deeper than what I was experiencing it. And then I realized, almost similarly to what Skittle said, and John is old too, so like my freedom fighter. That's not to say I excuse him for it, but I just mean I wasn't even waiting for him anyway. Like, I'm like, I wasn't even waiting for you. But to see my dad experience that show, I was like, actually, fuck yes. And then at Hispanicize, when Skittles and I went, he won an award and he spoke. And ironically, in his speech, the focus of the change and when he was talking about the Latinx community was Afro-Latinos. So I was like, either somebody called him out and he listened, you know what I mean? Or he has a great marketing team. But he was talking about Afro-Latinos heavy in a way where I was sitting there like, shame, motherfucker, because this is a good speech and you right about what you're saying about it. Saying about us, you know what I mean? He was doing the whole like, we have to stop doing this thing where we ignore Afro-Latinos, da da da. And in my head, I'm like, but you ignore us, but you saying it, so I'm gonna just keep my cool because you're saying it. You know what I mean? Like, and I much rather than cancel culture, I much rather say, if you're gonna say that, all right, now you said it, so let me hold you to your words. Let me usher you into what that needs to look like because you said it. I didn't even force you to do it, right? So anyway, but you were saying John Leguizamo also had to struggle. Sorry.
But But even bringing that show to Broadway was a journey, and you know the fights to have to get it to get it to that point. And I'm still struggling with what does that look like on Broadway, because Broadway has more to do with the producers who are willing to front the money to put
Mm-hmm.
stories on there. And it's like, so how do we get moneyed Latinx folk and money
Mm-hmm.
Latinx folk to invest in getting these shows? I mean, when you look at like Eclipse, wait, what'd you say?
I said, Lynn, you got money. Create the
You got
space,
money,
Lynn.
you got
You got that Disney money, Lynn.
Disney money.
Create the space, Lynn.
But when you look at Eclipse, like that was three black producers, three actually I think it was more. It was a bunch of black celebrities that were like, we're gonna put this story. But Lupita Nyong'o was also fighting for that story
Mm.
be on Broadway, because I think it was like she came across it at Yale when she was in school. And same thing with like Fela Kuti, when that was put out, that was black celebrity money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, how are Latinx celebrity money supporting this? It's like, on your feet, who was producing that? Who was behind that? And that's the thing, right? Because and this is when art becomes so entrenched with capitalism in the
Yeah.
ways of like, does Broadway actually then serve us in the way
Mm.
we want it to serve us? It really doesn't.
Yeah.
Because if it takes millions of dollars that we just don't have to put up a show to be able to be nominated for a Tony Award, it's like, then what really is our true investment in our work, and how what is it that we really care about at the end of the day?
Which is crazy, because I feel like if only these people with this money knew how much people would turn out for this work, how much the community, how much they would gain from it monetarily,
Right.
by just investing in it, because the community will support the art that's being produced.
Yes, but Hamilton wasn't really seen by many black and brown folk until it was on the Disney Channel.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Other conversation about Broadway is accessibility. It's
yes, and education. Period. Like,
yeah.
the schools that our kids are going to don't have music classes. Period. So they're not even considering going to become the composer, or going to become the playwright, or going to become even the dancer or the singer or the actor, because they don't have access to the education that would lead them down the path to go and make the community bigger.
Right. And then the responsibility is like, you wonder if it's like, okay, so then is that the playwright's responsibility to then really try to make it as accessible to audiences as much as possible? Like, I think of Slave Play, which is
I never watched it or read it, but I have to. I know.
I'm not putting that on you, sis.
I've been told I have to, and I was like,
okay. Well, someone else.
Well, it has 12 Tony nominations, right?
Yeah.
But what I thought was really dope that Jeremy O'Harris did was this thing of making the tickets as accessible as possible, creating Black Theater Night, getting white patrons to sponsor motherfuckers. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, he was really like invested in making sure that Black people were going to see this play. And it's like, so then what are we doing? Like, we as Latinx, right? I'm not saying like we as Black, because, right? But like, what are we who are part of the Latinx community really doing to get our folk to see our work? Because I mean, I know for me, like, I write for the Dominican community. I don't write for the white gays.
Or like, yeah.
Right. Like, and and I write for Black folk. Like, I write for my people. Right. You know what I'm saying? That's who I want invested in my work, right? And if white folk are able to connect with it, great.
Right.
I'm a storyteller at the end of the day. Like if I'm as a storyteller, people are going to connect with the story regardless, right? It's the same reason why we can read Greek mythology and fuck with it, because we get it. You know what I'm saying? Like that's just storytelling. But the specifics of the story and the nuance of the story, like that's eso pa mi gente, you know? And but knowing that, and a play gets to like Broadway, or it gets to like one of these big off Broadway theaters, it's like, then what is my role as the playwright, as the creator of this work, to make sure that my community is coming to see this work, right? Like that's it's so layered. Like theater is so layered, and being a theater practitioner, a BIPOC practitioner of theater is so layered because there's all these things. And it also depends on how much you give a fuck. If you don't give a fuck, then you're just writing your work and you want your shit to be produced, and then you go home and that's it, right? But, you know, what's really your investment in writing for your community?
Yes. Oh, girl, what a gem. And I honestly, like, to the same vein of that, and I'll close, like, you know, I'll close with this question. People keep saying theater is dead. And so what I am finding right now is both with the revolution of what's happening, and on top of that, the added layer of Broadway having to figure itself out in a new way. And when I say Broadway, I also mean off Broadway, because to me, or as an Afro-Latinx, like as a Dominican, even, I've just always found that the lane there felt just as difficult as Broadway. So I could be tight at Broadway, but I'm tight at off Broadway already. Or I can get mad at Broadway. They're not even letting me get to level 1. Like it's frustrating. So I have the same energy towards them. I say that to say that. But I just kind of feel like part of the struggle that they're having, and the only reason people are saying that theater is dead, is what they mean is that theater, as the huge monetization of theater that was happening for people, is dead, because that monetization had to do with seating placement and the way in which they were able to build exclusivity in a particular way. And then now it's the exclusivity also includes exclusivity of safety. And that is not something that you can class out too much. You know what I mean? Without being like side-eyed, like really, you're going to like make people pay more to risk their life less? That's crazy, right? But if they did it, I wouldn't put it past them. I'm just going to say that now in case, this dates itself. And then later we get an article from the New York Times about how they're selling fucking Broadway tickets in tiers of safety.
Oh my God.
But it's about the money. They can't make the money the same. I'm looking at Broadway and the particular streets from whatever the fuck it starts to wherever the fuck it ends, not being the center of it anymore, as the biggest fucking gift that I got as a theater artist out of this pandemic. Because now, if it's about the artistry, now if it's just about creating you have to do theater on Zoom? No, if you're going to take it off Zoom, where's it going to go? It has to go back to the streets. And at that point now, like, it creates an opportunity where, like, yeah, theater in the Bronx. Yeah, theater wherever the fuck, because we don't need to take the train to 42nd Street. It's nothing there for you anymore. So now I think for me, it's almost like I have for a very long time ago let go of this notion that I was gonna make my financial career out of being a playwright. That's why I do 10 million other things. Because my real heart in being an artist is about being able to say, yeah, I was part of the revolution where when Broadway closed, we were in the fucking Heights, or we were in fucking Parkchester by the little fountain, and we were doing theater, and it was for the people, and it's exactly what I yap about. And I feel like I have an opportunity to walk the walk behind the talk of how theater is bigger than what we allow it to be in the constraints of that structure. But it's easy for me to say as somebody who's saying, I also don't think this is how I'm going to make my money. So I'm putting that out there, but I do feel like there's a huge opportunity. So to me, theater, the industry of the financials might be very weak right now, but the artistry is more alive than it's ever fucking been. So there's no way theater is going to die. Theater started in the streets. You know what I mean? So I'm like, we got to go back to basics, baby. Relax. You don't have the power right now until you do, right? Because Lord knows how they're going to figure it out. But I'm just curious about y'all's thoughts about that.
I will say a lot of theaters specifically off-Broadway theaters, don't, the money that they have, they don't make it from ticket sales. It's donations.
Mm.
Donations, it's grants, it's subscribers, like,
Mm.
ticket sales, but a great majority of these theaters, the money comes from wealthy people giving them money, from their board and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, so theater can be reinvented. Like, it doesn't have to be in a space, absolutely, right? But it's like, it's the thing of, how do you change a way of doing things that people will buy into and people will see the benefit of it. I don't think theater is dead. I do agree with you, Julissa. It's a matter of like taking it back to the streets and really seeing how there's the thing of we've something that has also been with me is we've been doing theater the same for the past. How old is Shakespeare? You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
It's that, it's very Greco-Roman, it's very British, right? But I'm also very much like, well, okay, cool, so how were my ancestors doing theater?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Think of how our ancestors would come together in, for example, like with Tainos, when they will come together in the bohíos and in the bateis and create music and tell stories, because that's how they kept their history alive.
Right.
That's a form of theater. You're doing that, with the community. That's theater.
Yeah.
Or during rituals and ceremonies where where everyone is there watching these. That's theater.
Yeah.
The performances. Hasta cuando se montan los santos, and you're doing. That's a theatrical.
That shit is theatrical as fuck.
Yeah, that's the theatrical thing of it, and I'm more interested in seeing in the ways in which we can really think outside of how we've been doing theater, in the ways that are reflective of our cultural differences and our experiences. The things that I love about experimental theater and even like immersive theater, right, is because it's fucking different.
Mm.
It's not the usual shit that you go and you see you have two acts, you go pee in the middle and then you come back and you sit down. You know what I'm saying? Like what are the different ways that we can do theater? And to me that's exciting, because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to revolutionize and not even revolutionize, because that sounds real like, oh, like just
Mm-hmm.
like super like, even to the basics. It's like, how can we let artists be artists?
Right.
How can we let artists use their complete imagination to tell this story that they want to tell?
Right.
Because that's also the other thing. When you look at like how white supremacy works, it's forcing non-white folk to operate in the ways in which white folks operate. So it's like, I have to do theater how you do theater, but that's not how I tell stories.
Right.
Can I do it in my way? No, because this is how we do things. And it's like, can we allow for a different way of telling stories, a different way of doing theater? So I don't think it's dead. I also, right now, because of Black Lives Matter and the pandemic, I'm also seeing a lot of white folks moving away from being allies to becoming co-conspirators, and that to me is really exciting. Because it's like, how are you going to become involved in this movement in the ways that you haven't been involved, and how can we work together to really push forward what true equity looks like, especially in theater.
Mm-hmm.
In general, for our communities, our neighbors, and our family members. But as artists, what does that look like in theater? And I find that really exciting. I'm also really loving seeing young Black and brown kids like just really fucking shit up and like being creative. Like,
yeah.
I know people have issues with TikTok, but I'm like, these kids,
they're creative as fuck.
Yeah.
These kids are creative as fuck.
The babies shall lead.
Yeah.
I'm here for the TikTok kids. Like, I am.
Because some of it is really fucking creative. Like, and granted, like, there's that level of like, oh, well, they're taking audio and they're taking this and that from stuff that's already been creative, but they're really being transformative with it. Like,
Sounds like hip hop.
I'm here for the kids. But I think overall, yeah, I'm just really interested to see how theater is going to transform. I am interested to see how our voices are going to really inject itself. I think because theater is, you know, down, like is one leg out right now, that even the use of technology and how that plays a role in theatrics is going to create more space for more theater makers. And excuse me, I'm excited to see it. I'm just excited to see what happens.
And
Word.
the ability of that, like there's so many folks who, you know, who are disabled that aren't able to make it because let's be real, a lot of these theaters are not up to fucking ADA code.
Mm-mm.
So
No,
it's like,
yeah,
and or you know, the abuela and the tia that are like, theater's not for me because they're not used to seeing stories about them,
yeah,
right? So creating accessibility in a way where it's like anyone can have the ability to like tune in or to participate in you know taking this in. And I think that that was like the thing that was really smart about Hamilton. It's like everyone watched it, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
like if you didn't have a TV, obviously that's a different conversation, or you can't afford Disney, pero you're, you're fine.
I haven't. I just wanted to admit that I haven't. I actually was listening to the soundtrack this weekend. I was trying, and I just didn't have the attention span. I'm a visual person. I'm not just. I can listen to Broadway soundtrack after I've already made a connection with the piece, but if I haven't yet, sometimes it's hard, and it's hard when it's hip hop sounding like this, and I don't sound like that. So when I hear it, I'm like, okay.
Listen, I think that the Disney Plus way of doing it was extremely smart, you know. I
Yeah.
think as someone who saw it on Broadway and then saw it on Disney, I got it more on Disney because of the way it was shot. I just feel well, and also what played a factor in that was that I didn't have glasses when I saw it live, so it was just like a lot of blurry movement mixed with fast rapping that I like was like what but so the Disney did help me understand it more, but I'm an In the Heights girl all day because I just like it better, and I don't like Hamilton as much.
Actually, not stand behind it because there was wickedness being claimed and I didn't feel well represented. And I got over it. That's literally it. I'm not even saying it's poorly written. I'm not saying that the songs ain't cute. I watched it and I remember feeling a surge of like, this isn't really it. This feels like Sesame Street, but I'm glad we up here. So I did
Mm-hmm.
have that moment of the like, I'm not mad at it, but come on, bro. But also maybe he wasn't allowed. And I think I just played into this. Well, he wouldn't have gotten away with it if it was what I wanted it to be. And
Mm-hmm.
I've still waited for the moment that he makes something that to me feels like is making it, and he's making a statement, and he's not afraid to be raw. Because it's not that he's dishonest, but it's like raw, like a rawness. Like, is he ever gonna?
Yeah,
But I don't think he's raw. I just think he's way
that's
No, that's what I'm saying.
that's what she's saying. Yeah, she's saying that rawness isn't there for her. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I could be like, oh, I love this or that. I don't love Hamilton and I don't love In the Heights. I did
Yeah.
feel represented because it was the first time I heard the word Dominican on a stage. And it was like,
Mm-hmm.
it was shocking. And there's just something about that. You know what I mean? In the same way,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure people felt some type of way when they saw West Side Story, and maybe there was a level of representation, even though they were completely misrepresented.
Mexican music.
But it's the weird, like we have nothing, so when we get something, sometimes it's hard to not get a little excited. It's how I felt watching the Super Bowl show with Shakira and Jay.
With J-Lo and Shakira.
Get down, bitches, but you look good, but get down off that stage. Damn, you did it. And it's just like this like fucking like duality of like the pride because I knew what it meant, but also like really now is not the time for this one. But is it not the time?
ways in which we're made pawns.
I was like torn between the two. Anyway, I'm rambling. I'm just saying I'm very interested to see how theater is going to transform. And I hope to see, you know, I can't wait until everybody's talking about Guadalis's play and that Guadalis.
Yes.
Because because I'm gonna be there. Like I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna take that flag right behind me. I'm gonna be in the audience with the flag.
You
Yes.
You better. Can I say like real talk? Like I've had conversations before. Like I don't know how I feel about these loud audiences. I love loud ass fucking audiences. Right now, it reminds me of my abuela yelling at the TV watching her telenovela. Like I love it when audiences have a reaction watching your shit because it's like,
Yes.
what the fuck else am I writing this for?
Yes, come on.
You know, like yes, I want to hear like my first play in Chicago. Like we had audiences who were like, "Y lo va a tomar para atrás," like out loud, like they were like, oh, I love that. I love that. Like, please let me know that you are watching and enjoying.
Yes.
Please
Yes.
have a human reaction to this human story.
I love it. Yes.
Yes. And when we do revolutionize theater, I'm going to speak into existence because I don't write plays, but I want to be in plays. So cast me.
Yes. Yes, kiddos. I've seen your videos.
Like real.
Out here working.
Listen, I'm a really good best friend. That's my new tagline. I'm
You're
a really
also-
funny
no,
best
you're
friend.
also a very good lead.
Aw, thank you.
That's right. That's right.
I
right.
appreciate that.
Well, Guadalis, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been such a joy. I hope you've had fun with us too. Let everybody know where we can find you, follow your work, any new projects that are coming up, any shout outs, anything.
Let's see. The Latinx Playwright Circle, I mean, we did our greater good. Congratulations, Julie.
Yes, thank you.
Whoop, whoop.
I believe it's still up on Pregone's like social medias. But we also have 2 other readings to finish out our first season, which is wild. Our first season was the virtual one. And that's happening at the end of November and the beginning of December. We'll have Andres Osorio's play, The Hostel play, and Andrew Rincon's play, The Lonely, which are 2 really beautiful plays, and that'll finish out our season. I have no clue what's happening with Bees and Honey because I don't know what's going to happen to theater next year. So we'll see. I am on Instagram, Guadalis DC. It is private, but if you request me,
Send her a little DM that Ladies Who Brunch sent you.
Yes. Just say Ladies Who Brunch sent you. And Facebook, I'm on Facebook. I'm constantly yelling on Facebook, so you'll hear me. And when is this episode dropping?
This Sunday.
This Sunday? I'm like, I am producing a festival coming up, but it's in December, so I'm like, I don't know if I can talk about it yet.
But be on the lookout.
Well, be on the lookout.
Yes.
We'll reshare.
Stuff is coming. I just can't like say much, but just be on the lookout. That's for sure.
Let's.
Awesome. Skittles,
Yes.
find us.
And y'all can find us at Ladies Who Brunch on Instagram, Ladies Brunch on Twitter, Ladies Who Brunch on YouTube, at Julissa on Instagram for Julissa, and at The Real Skittles with a Z for me. Ooh, bars, right?
I really appreciate y'all.
And we really appreciate you and everyone listening. Thanks for joining us today. And until next time, bronche.